My name is Bryon and I'm a former professional footballer for Crystal Palace.
Does take on the shots. Bryon scores.
I've played for the club for pretty much my whole life. From the ages of 8 to 23, I was there. However, during that 15-year spell, I spent over 9 years out injured. I ended up having to retire at 23, and I've since transitioned into business on my own, setting up and scaling multiple online businesses. In this video, I'm going to explain exactly how my football career went, my highlights, how it started, and how I transitioned after being told I was no longer able to play football. As a young kid, I grew up in South East London, which is where I still live today. And growing up, I was just obsessed with sports, as most kids are. I think I enjoyed sports so much and played them so often as a kid because I was quite good at them. And looking back, I was probably that annoying kid in school that was good at most sports. However, I quickly found out that football was what I excelled in most. And what you're good at, you enjoy. And what you enjoy, you end up playing more and more. So that's sort of how my football career spiraled into what it became. So around 6 or 7, I started to play for my local Sunday league team. By the time we were sort of playing proper games and tournaments, we basically just won everything. And that naturally led to scouts and clubs coming to watch these games and approaching my parents to go on trial. I think at the age of 8, I ended up going on trial at Arsenal, Crystal Palace, Tottenham and Charlton. And I was actually on trial at a different club every day of the week. So Monday it might be Arsenal, Tuesday it might be Charlton, which sounds exciting, and it was, but the travel was definitely not. And again, I've got to thank my parents for that. You know, the support they showed driving me to these places after school every day of the week, taking the time out of their own day to do that. I know a lot of kids don't have that. You know, a lot of my teammates at the time, even at the age of 8, 9, were getting the train for an hour with their brother to turn up to training. So looking back, I'm very, very grateful that I had my parents to support me in that way. But after a few weeks of being on trial, I ended up joining Crystal Palace. After about 2 or 3 weeks, they offered me a contract and I didn't really hesitate at a chance. The fact they offered it so quickly shows that they were very keen, and, you know, you want to go somewhere that, you know, you feel valued as well. And it would have always been a risk if I didn't go with Palace and held out. They could have changed their mind. The other clubs might not be interested. So I ended up signing for Crystal Palace just before I turned 9. Now, just before I touch on the rest of the academy and injury journey, which was the bulk of my football career, I'll just talk through some of the highlights I've had playing for Crystal Palace. The first one would have to be my first training session with the first team. Training with players I'd watched on TV at the age of 16 was a massive highlight, and it sort of opened my eyes up to tell me that this is real now. If you hold your own in a training session with players you're watching on TV that are the best in the world and you're 16, it just breeds that confidence into you and actually tells you that this dream you've had as a kid can become a reality. Another highlight would have had to been signing my first professional contract. You know, as a kid, for years and years, you dream of just signing that professional contract so you can call yourself a professional footballer. You know, 90% of the kids in my school that I knew all wanted to be footballers when they were young. It's something that at times I didn't think would be possible simply because of my injury story, which I'll get onto. So signing that was like, right, I've done what I had my mind on for the last 10 years. Like, I've actually achieved it. And that was probably the best day I've had in my football career. And I'd say my last highlight from my career would be probably my first game playing for the first team. Training is all good, and you know, you can get a bit of respect from the players from training and you can get a little taste for it and dip your toe in. But until you've actually been trusted in a game to play alongside them where, you know, winning matters, that shows that there's trust in you. Like I said before with the training, it sort of just breeds that confidence, gives you that extra motivation and shows you, right, I'm actually ready to go here. Like, I'm not far off this at all. That was a great moment, and they're probably the top 3 highlights of my football career. But back onto the rest of my academy journey and mainly the injury story. Because, like I said, I signed at 9, and the first 3 or 4 years, I was loving every minute of it. You know, I was loving training, I was loving playing to a high level and playing for a Premier League club. But as time went on, maybe once I reached around 11 or 12 years old, the fun did get sucked out of it a little bit for me, simply because it was the travel. The travel I did not enjoy. I'd go to school from 9 till 3. I'd basically get in the car and have dinner in the car on the way to training, travel an hour, hour and a half there, train for 2 hours, and then get a car back for an hour and a half. So my whole day was pretty much gone, and only a small part of that was actually playing football. And I'd do that Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. That would be my week. And then on the weekends, you could be travelling to Portsmouth, to Norwich, all over the country to play football, which is, again, it was unbelievable. But after them 3-4 years of doing that, as, a 9, 10, 11-year-old, it did start to just take its toll on the enjoyment of it. And another thing to note is the training, although it's really fun and it's a good level for that age, it's not like playing football with your friends at school. Football is what I enjoyed. I enjoyed playing football, but when it starts to become very structured and you're almost limited in what you can do, the enjoyment gets sucked out of it a little bit. Like, I always enjoyed it when I was there, but nowhere near as much as if I was having a kick about with my mates. And as a young kid, it's not always what you want. Like, you still want to have that dream to become a pro footballer, but you have to enjoy it as well to be able to put in the hours that you need to get there. Around 12, 13 years old is when my injuries really started to come apparent. I went into the under-13 season, and after a week, 2 weeks of playing, I started picking up knee pain. And after a few 3 or 4 months went by, the pain didn't really go. It didn't really get any better. The rehab I was doing wasn't really helping too much. And then you start to worry a little bit. Then, click of the fingers, 6, 7 months have gone by. And that's when it was like, right, nothing's getting better. And it was like really sort of panicking, what is wrong now? And you start to overthink and get worried about the future. And this was all knee pain related. So there was no ACL, no broken bones. It was just, I was feeling pain when I was running with my knees. I ended up getting injured at the start of the 13 season, missing all the under-13s, missing all the under-14s and all the under-15 season. So it was 3 straight years I didn't play, which was probably the toughest point, definitely up to that point of my life, and maybe even up to today. I was 13, 14, 15 years old. All my friends were at school going to play football at lunch or going to play football on the weekend. I couldn't, I had to stay inside. I wasn't able to play. I'd have to go travel an hour and a half to Crystal Palace, where I'd have to do exercises for, an hour and a half that I didn't want to do, while all the other boys were out training, progressing, getting better. And I felt, firstly, just stuck because there was no progress in my pain. And I felt like I was getting left behind because they're all improving their skills. I'm staying still. And on top of that, I was in pain every day with it. I remember coming home from training, crying in the car with my mum, just like, what is going to happen? Like, how can I get this better? Why is this happening to me? But I ended up looking around and my parents helped me sort of search online, and we found Southampton University were doing a study on this sort of pain. And we went and see them. They'd done a full screening on me, loads of tests, and they set me a specific, very specific sort of rehab and mindset plan, which I ended up following religiously twice a day while I was at school. I do it before and after school. I never missed a day for probably 3 or 4 months, and the pain started to ease off. It started to get better, and I eventually got back to training, sort of the start of the under-16 season for Crystal Palace. And once I got back, I spent probably 1 to 2 months training. And then by October, November time in the season, I started to play some games again. Fast forward 2 months, I'd played 2 months of games in the last probably 3.5 years. And Crystal Palace offered me a scholarship at the club for the under-17 and 18 season. The structure, the discipline I had during all my years of injuries as a teenager had paid off. First 2 months were amazing. And come the 3rd month, I started to experience my knee pains again. I was on and off for the rest of the season, mainly off on the sidelines. I was just playing through a lot of pain, and eventually, come sort of the end of the season, the pain got too much to try and play through, and I had to take another 10 full months out injured. I ended up getting back playing through an injection in my knee, a steroid injection, which helped for a few months, allowed me to play the last 3-4 months of the season. During them 3-4 months, I ended up getting offered my pro contract. However, as I said, the injections are very short-term benefits, and long-term it probably made my knees a little bit worse. As I was coming back into my first season as a pro footballer, the knee pain slowly started getting worse and worse again. I think 6 to 8 weeks into it, I was waking up in agony. You know, I was unable to walk naturally. I couldn't jog or sprint properly, change direction. I couldn't even really stand on one leg properly. And I was training during this whole time. You know, I was hobbling through training, just trying to get through it, you know, getting wheelchaired out. And then come to the games on the weekend, I would load myself up with painkillers because I knew that's when I had to perform. And I would play well. I'd play really well in these games, and then I'd be in agony during the week. And the club was sort of confused on what's happening, but like, why is that the case? You know, is he just bobbing off training? But I just couldn't take the painkillers during the week because they wouldn't work on the weekends when I needed them to matter during the games. So I was in agony, you know, and it was an injury where, you know, there was nothing clinically wrong with me. So there was no broken bone, there was no ACL. So if I could get through the pain, the club said I could train if I can get through the pain and deal with it. So it was almost the pressure put back on me. And that's the reason why I kept trying to play through it. But I remember waking up one point, probably 2 months into the season, and I just couldn't get out of bed. My knees were in that much pain. We then went and see the best physio in the country, really, for that type of knee pain, and the best surgeon in the country for that type of knee pain. And funnily enough, the physio wanted me to go down the physiotherapy route, and the surgeon wanted me to have surgery. We tried the physiotherapy route for probably an intense 10 months, 6 to 10 months. It was very intense, and I ended up getting back on the pitch after 4 or 5 months, doing some running away from the team still with the physio. You know, the pain was still there, and then as I started to up it, the pain just got worse and worse, and it still just wasn't right. And I couldn't go back into that cycle of playing through pain and struggling and painkillers again. So we tried that for a good 10 months, and then we went and see the surgeon, and I ended up having surgery on both my knees. The first one was at the start of the lockdowns, and the second one was 5 months after that. What both the physio and the surgeon were saying is the reason I was getting a lot of pain is because I have slightly high kneecaps for someone that's in full-time sport. So it's very common day-to-day people to have high kneecaps or slightly higher, and they'll be fine in day-to-day activities, day-to-day life. But if you're playing sport every single day, it's a lot more rare to see it. So I had the surgeries to basically lower my kneecap. For full-time footballers, I think it's been done 2 or 3 times in history. So I knew it was a very risky and very rare operation to have. I had both the surgeries, and the rehab was just very foreign to everyone. The rehab protocol, you know, there wasn't a protocol because it's been done so few times. The physios weren't like following a system really, because there was nothing to follow. It was seeing how I was every day and what's working, what's not. And that in partnered with my chronic pain before the rare risky surgery, it made the recovery very, very tough. My worst knee, which was my right knee, my worst knee before the surgery, ended up getting a little bit better after the surgery immediately. And then my better knee, which was almost like, it was near enough fine before the surgery, ended up getting a lot worse after the surgery. So, you know, that 2 years probably after the surgeries was up there with, you know, the toughest things mentally and physically I've ever had to go through, and I think I ever will have to go through, hopefully. And go down the line another 3 years, I still couldn't shake the pain. I couldn't get back on the pitch. So I had to really call it a day on my football career. It wasn't like I was released from Crystal Palace. They always said to me, if I can get back training, you know, they'd sort out my contracts and we'd go from there. But I just couldn't get back on the pitch, and they can't keep giving me contracts when I'm not giving them nothing in return. So I had to call it a day at 23. I know it's something a lot of footballers and athletes struggle with when they come out the game, no matter what the circumstances are. And I was no different. You know, you lose your purpose, your identity, and your income overnight, and you're wondering what's next. You know, you're not too sure, and you can feel lost. So I immediately went into academy coaching, started coaching the academy while I wanted to figure out exactly what I wanted to do. I knew the coaching the Crystal Palace Academy was there for me. But I quickly realised that I wanted to get into entrepreneurship. I wanted to start my own thing. And to dip my toe in, I thought, you know, what unfair advantage do I have? I know a lot of footballers. I know footballers like to spend a lot of money. So I started up a personal shopping business, and I turned over 30,000 in the first 3 months. I kept that going for about a year, just over a year. I then put that to the side because I knew I didn't want to do that full time, like for a long period of time. I just wanted to dip my toe in and see what the business side was all about and learn key things you need to learn in the first few stages of your business career. And after I stopped the personal shopping side of things, I then went into the media side. This was originally through the club, and I started off doing some co-coms, some player interviews. But again, I wanted to start my own thing. So I started a football show. For the first 12 to 18 months, no one really listened. It didn't really earn any money at all. But fast forward to today, we're just over 2 years in. The last month we hit 22 million monthly views, as we have done the last 3 or 4 months. It's got multiple revenue streams, and the revenue is doubling month on month as well. Again, that just shows the mindset of having the discipline to do stuff, which is doing an action without getting a reward back. You know, as I did with my injuries, 3 years of physio every day with no reward until the third year. That was the same with the podcast, and that's the same with many other businesses I've started. That was while I was coaching the academy, I started that business, and about a year later I come out the academy and I took all the things I'd learned from my academy coaching days, my playing days, and took my coaching online. And I was coaching young aspiring footballers on how to replicate the training of a pro in the gym, on the pitch, working on the mindset side of things with them, the psychology, and that was all in digital products, training programs, mentorships, one-to-one calls, and that's done very well. And about 6 months into that, it sort of transitioned into a high performance coaching, all online still, for execs, targeting executives' pain points, you know, C-suites where they're looking for how to increase productivity, increase their energy and focus, how to maintain their fitness levels despite having a really busy schedule. But over the last 3 or 4 months, my attention has gone away from that. The main focus for me at the moment is helping athletes and ex-athletes transition out of the game when they're retired, when they're at the end of their career, and using all the traits and skills they've built up in sport just in a different vehicle. Specifically, I've been helping them get into high ticket remote sales. Footballers and athletes have traits and skills that they've developed over years and years in an elite environment. All of these traits they have are very transferable into business, and a lot of people will never develop them. And they're all perfect to use in the vehicle of remote sales, where you've got the freedom to work from wherever you want, the freedom to pick your own schedule, and the ability to earn anywhere from $10,000 a month to $50,000 a month. And just touching on this, a similar topic on how the skills I developed in my football career helps me progress in what I'm doing now. Because those experiences I went through as a footballer, spending 3+ years out as a teenager, multiple years out after that, I would not change one bit of them. You know, I wouldn't change any of the injuries. I wouldn't change having to come out of the game at 23, because what they gave me are priceless in terms of I've now got the resilience and belief that I can overcome and get through any tough time or any setback. And I think that's one of the best traits you can have. I said to myself once I come out the game and started going into business, if I could apply the same structure, discipline, resilience and high standards I did to get through my injury, if I could apply them just to a different vehicle like business, I knew I'd be successful and I knew I'd get to where I want to be. And I don't think it's actually spoken about enough, like the competitiveness that athletes have, pro athletes have, is massively, massively overlooked in the business world. You know, you've been around the highest standards every single day for 10, 15 years, where if you drop off just 10% one day, that could mean you're out the team on the weekend. If you're out the team on the weekend, you could lose your place at that club. You could drop down the levels and that could be your career done. Those are the consequences and the standards that athletes are used to holding every single day. And they rub off on you when you're around that as well. You know, and these are the fundamentals, them standards, that drive that I see lacking in so many business environments. You know, they just do enough to get by. If you slack off one day, it's no big deal. You know, you're still going to collect your wage at the end of the month. You know, you're not going to get dropped or sacked like you would in football. You know, 2-3 years down the line, you probably get a promotion. And I feel if you then put an athlete in that environment, they'll up the levels, not just of themselves, but of everyone. And that's just going to up the business's success. Now, lastly, I just want to touch on some of the best advice I've ever received during my football career, my business career. And that is, number one, focus on what you can do. When I was injured for 3 years, you know, I could focus on, oh, I can't play football with my friends. I can't progress and develop my skills. I couldn't walk without pain. I couldn't stand on one leg. You know, all these things I couldn't do. If I focused on them, it would make me demotivated, depressed, have a victim mindset. I'll just spiral negatively. Whereas if you focus on what you can do, just one thing, you know, for me, it might have been, I can work more on my upper body. I could focus on my nutrition. I could watch more football and improve my game understanding. If you pick just one thing you can do and focus on that, you'll find month after month, you'll start to be able to do more and more things, and eventually you'll be able to do everything. You know, focus on what you can do and you'll be able to do everything. And the second best bit of advice I've received in my career is from my Crystal Palace under-18 manager, Paddy McCarthy, and he said, stay on the process. And that just means don't get too high with the highs and don't get too low with the lows. Coming in after a loss, if you just lost 4-0 and you're really down and you let that affect how you're going to work in the gym or your attitude towards training, these are just going to enforce bad and negative habits if you get too up and down and yo-yo-y. And it's a mental strain if you're up here 1 minute, down here the next. If you can stay as level as you can with good and bad news, you can then maintain these good standards, and then standards will become your habit, you know, regardless of whether you're succeeding or failing or going through a tough time or doing really well. You stay on the process and you maintain high standards. The last thing I want to say is that if you are a footballer or an athlete coming to the end of your career, or you've come out the game already and you're wondering what's next, you're not sure what to do, you know, you're looking to regain your income, your purpose, identity, my personal social accounts are linked in the description below. So just drop me a DM and I'll be happy to help you out.